Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. We should have never gone to Theodore Roosevelt National Park. I'm Michael Carter, I was 31 back then, and this is the story of how I lost everything. The November wind howled across the painted badlands of North Dakota like the dying breath of something ancient and malevolent. Our 28-foot Winnebago Micro Mini sat dwarfed against the towering buttes and carved canyons of Theodore Roosevelt National Park, its white shell barely visible in the swirling snow that had begun falling an hour after sunset. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" my wife Jennifer asked for the third time, peering through the frosted window at the alien landscape beyond. The weather report said possible blizzard conditions. I looked up from my laptop where I'd been editing wedding photos from our latest shoot. "We've weathered worse storms than this, Jen. Besides, we wanted isolation for the honeymoon portfolio, remember? Can't get much more isolated than this." Jennifer Martinez Carter, she'd only taken my name 2 months ago, was a talented photographer in her own right, specializing in wedding portraits while I handled the ceremony coverage. This trip was supposed to be both a delayed honeymoon and a professional venture, capturing the stark beauty of the North Dakota Badlands in winter for a gallery showing we'd planned for spring. "I just feel like we're being watched," she said, wrapping her arms around herself despite the RV's efficient heating system. "Ever since we got here, it's like something's looking back at us through the camera viewfinders." I closed the laptop and moved to sit beside her on the dinette that converted into our bed. Through the window, the Badlands stretched endlessly in all directions, layered rock formations carved by millennia of wind and water into fantastical shapes that looked like sleeping giants or ancient ruins. In the gathering snow, they took on an even more surreal quality, as if we'd driven into an alien world. "It's just the landscape," I said, though I'd felt it too. That sensation of being observed, studied, cataloged by something that existed just beyond the edges of perception. These formations play tricks on the eyes. Native Americans thought this whole region was haunted. Maybe they were right. I pulled Jennifer closer, feeling the tension in her shoulders. She'd been on edge since we'd arrived at this remote camping spot 3 days ago, following directions we'd found on an obscure photography forum. The coordinates had led us to a hidden valley between 2 massive buttes, accessible only by an unmarked dirt road that didn't appear on any map. The location was perfect for our purposes, completely isolated, with dramatic rock formations that changed color with the shifting light. But there was something unsettling about the place, something that made our cameras behave strangely and our reflections appear distorted in every mirror and window. "Look," Jennifer said suddenly, pointing toward the passenger side mirror mounted outside our window. "Do you see that?" I followed her gaze and felt my blood chill. In the mirror's reflection, clearly visible despite the swirling snow, was a figure standing about 50 yards from our RV. It appeared to be a woman in a dark coat, perfectly still, facing our vehicle. But when I looked directly through the window at the spot where the figure should be, there was nothing but empty badlands and falling snow. "That's impossible," I whispered. But even as I said it, the figure in the mirror raised one hand in what might have been a greeting, or a warning. Jennifer grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. "Michael, that's not possible. Look outside, there's no one there." But in the mirror, the figure began walking toward our RV, its movement clearly visible in the reflection while the actual landscape remained empty. As it drew closer, I could make out more details. A woman with long dark hair, wearing a coat that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her face was pale as bone, and her eyes were completely black. "Get away from the window," I said, pulling Jennifer back from the glass. But it was too late. The figure in the mirror had reached our RV and was now pressing its hands against the reflected surface, as if trying to push through from the other side. I watched in horror as the mirror began to ripple like water, the woman's black eyes staring directly at us despite the impossibility of the angle. Then the mirror shattered. Not the physical mirror outside, that remained intact. but the reflection itself fractured into 1,000 pieces, each shard showing a different image. Our RV from impossible angles, the badlands stretched and distorted, and always, the woman with black eyes watching us from within the broken reflections. "What the hell is happening?" Jennifer whispered. Before I could answer, every reflective surface in the RV began to behave strangely. The bathroom mirror showed not our frightened faces, but an empty badlands landscape under a blood-red sky. The black screen of my laptop displayed the interior of our RV, but from the perspective of someone standing outside in the snow. Even the chrome surface of our coffee pot reflected images that couldn't possibly be real. Shadowy figures moving through a landscape that looked like our campsite but wrong, distorted, as if seen through a funhouse mirror. "We need to leave," Jennifer said, her photographer's instinct for the unnatural overwhelming her fear. "Right now. Pack everything and get out of here." I nodded, but as I moved toward the driver's seat, I caught sight of something that made me freeze. In the RV's large side mirror, the one that had started this nightmare, I could see myself clearly. But my reflection was doing something I wasn't doing. It was smiling. Not just smiling, grinning with an expression of malevolent joy that I'd never worn in my life. And its eyes, like the woman in the snow, were completely black. "Jennifer," I said carefully, not taking my eyes off the mirror, "look at my reflection. Tell me what you see." She moved to where she could see the side mirror, and I heard her sharp intake of breath. "That's not you," she whispered. "I mean, it looks like you, but it's not doing what I'm doing." The reflection Michael waved at us, its black eyes sparkling with amusement. Then it pointed toward something behind us, inside the RV. We turned to look and saw nothing but our familiar belongings: camera equipment, clothes, the small altar Jennifer had set up for her Day of the Dead observances. But when we looked back at the mirror, our reflection selves were gone. The mirror showed only empty badlands under that impossible red sky. "Start the engine," Jennifer said. "Now." I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. I tried again with the same result. On the third attempt it caught, but the headlights revealed something that made both of us cry out in terror. The woman from the mirror was standing directly in front of our RV, her black eyes reflecting our headlight beams like an animal's. She wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, just standing in the falling snow as if she'd been there forever. But the worst part was what surrounded her. Dozens of other figures, all standing perfectly still in the swirling snow, all with the same pale skin and black eyes. Men, women, children, all staring at our RV with expressions of hungry anticipation. "Drive through them," Jennifer said, her voice tight with panic. "They're people, Jen. I can't just... Look at them. Those aren't people." She was right. As I watched, the figures began to move in perfect synchronization, all taking a single step closer to our RV, then another. Their movements were too fluid, too coordinated, like a choreographed dance performed by puppets sharing a single mind. I threw the RV into reverse, but the backup camera showed the same impossible thing. Dozens of pale figures surrounding us on all sides, closing in with that same eerie synchronization. The snow seemed to be falling upward in the camera's display, and the landscape looked like a photographic negative of reality. "The mirrors," Jennifer said suddenly. "It's the mirrors. They're not showing us what's really there. They're showing us their world, and somehow we're connected to it now." I thought about the photography forum where we'd found this location, about the coordinates that had led us to a place that didn't exist on any official map, about the user who'd posted the directions, someone called Mirror Walker, who'd claimed this spot offered reflections of truth and images beyond the veil. "We need to break every mirror in the RV," I said, "every reflective surface. Maybe that will sever the connection." Jennifer was already moving, grabbing a tire iron from our emergency kit. She swung it at the bathroom mirror, shattering the glass into 1,000 pieces. But instead of falling to the floor, the shards hung suspended in midair, each one showing a different, terrifying image. Our RV from impossible angles, the pale figures closing in, and always those black eyes watching us from within the fractured reflections. "It's not working," she said, backing away from the floating glass. "Breaking them just makes it worse." The suspended mirror shards began to rotate slowly like a mobile made of nightmares. In their fractured surfaces, I could see movement. The pale figures were inside the mirrors now, reaching toward us through the broken glass. Their hands emerged from the shards, pale fingers stretching into our reality like roots seeking soil. That's when I understood. These weren't just mirrors showing us another world. They were doorways, and something from the other side was trying to push through. "The cameras," I said, grabbing our professional equipment. "Every photo we've taken since we got here. We need to delete them all." Jennifer understood immediately. We'd been documenting this place for 3 days, capturing hundreds of images of the Badlands from every angle. But now I remembered details I'd missed while editing. Shadows that fell the wrong way, rock formations that appeared in different positions between shots, and always, if you looked carefully enough, pale figures standing just at the edge of the frame. I started deleting files while Jennifer smashed every reflective surface she could find. The chrome fixtures, the screen of our tablet, even the polished metal of our camp stove. But with each destruction, the supernatural activity intensified. The floating mirror shards multiplied, creating a galaxy of fractured reflections that showed us glimpses of a world where the pale figures ruled over empty badlands under a red sky. And they were getting closer to breaking through. A hand emerged from one of the larger shards, followed by an arm, then a shoulder. The pale woman from outside was climbing through the broken mirror into our RV, her black eyes fixed on us with predatory hunger. Behind her, I could see others waiting their turn to cross over. "The memory cards," Jennifer said desperately. "There are backup copies on the memory cards." I fumbled with our camera equipment, ejecting memory cards and crushing them under my heel. With each destroyed card, one of the pale figures would scream, a sound like wind through empty spaces, and fade from the mirrors. But there were so many of them, and only 2 of us. The woman was through the mirror now, standing in our RV with snow still clinging to her dark coat. Up close, I could see that she wasn't quite human. Her skin had the waxy quality of an old photograph, and her movements were too smooth, as if she were a stop-motion animation played at the wrong speed. "You cannot destroy all the reflections," she said, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "We exist in every image you have ever taken, every mirror you have ever looked into. We are the space between what is and what appears to be." More figures were climbing through the mirrors now, filling our small RV with their impossible presence. They seemed to occupy the same space we did without displacing us, as if we existed in parallel dimensions that were slowly merging. "What do you want?" Jennifer asked, clutching her camera like a weapon. The pale woman smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too white. "To be seen," she said, "to be acknowledged, to exist in your world instead of only in its reflections. For so long, we have watched from behind the glass, trapped in the spaces between light and shadow. But you brought us the perfect offering." She gestured to our cameras, our equipment, the hundreds of images we'd captured of this cursed place. "Every photograph is a doorway. Every reflection is a bridge, and you have built us a highway into your reality." I understood now why this place had been hidden, why the coordinates had been shared only in obscure corners of the internet. The Mirror Walker hadn't been trying to help photographers find a beautiful location. They'd been luring us here to serve as anchors, conduits between the world of reflections and the world of substance. "We can undo it," I said desperately. "We can destroy everything, delete every file, break every connection." The woman tilted her head, considering. "Perhaps, but would you sacrifice everything you have created together? Every image of your love, your joy, your shared dreams? We exist in all of them now, waiting to be born into your world." Jennifer and I looked at each other, understanding the terrible choice we faced. Our entire professional portfolio, our wedding photos, years of work and memories. All of it was contaminated now, infected with these creatures that lived in the spaces between light and shadow. But as I watched more pale figures climbing through the mirrors, I knew we had no choice. "Do it," Jennifer whispered. "Delete everything." I began the process of destroying our life's work, erasing image after image while the pale figures screamed and faded. Our wedding photos vanished first. Pictures of Jennifer in her white dress, of our first dance, of the joy in our faces as we promised to love each other forever. With each deletion, a piece of our shared history disappeared, but the mirrors grew a little clearer, a little more normal. The pale woman was fading now, becoming translucent as her connection to our world weakened. "You cannot escape us forever," she warned. "We exist in every reflection, every photograph, every surface that shows what is not quite real. And now we know your faces, your names, your love for each other. We will find you again. Then we'll be ready," Jennifer said, raising her camera and triggering the flash. The sudden burst of light filled the RV, and for a moment, every mirror showed only pure white illumination. When the after images faded, the pale figures were gone. The mirrors showed only normal reflections, and the floating glass shards had crashed to the floor in a glittering cascade. But we were changed, too. Looking at each other in the restored mirrors, we could see the cost of our escape. Our reflections were subtly wrong now. Our eyes slightly too dark, our smiles slightly too sharp. The creatures had left their mark on us, a permanent reminder that we had touched their world and survived. We left the Badlands that night, driving through the storm with broken mirrors and shattered dreams. The authorities later found our campsite empty except for scattered glass and strange photographic equipment they couldn't identify. Our RV's mirrors had been replaced with ordinary ones, but we knew the truth. Some reflections can never be trusted again. Jennifer and I rebuilt our photography business, but we specialized in digital work now, avoiding mirrors and reflective surfaces whenever possible. We learned to live with our changed reflections, with the knowledge that something inhuman looked back at us from every polished surface. And sometimes, late at night when the light hits just right, we can still see them. The pale figures standing just behind our reflections, waiting patiently for another chance to cross over into our world. The Badlands of North Dakota are closed to camping now, officially due to unstable geological conditions. But I know the real reason. The Mirror Walker is still out there, still posting coordinates to hidden places where the veil between worlds grows thin, still luring photographers and travelers to serve as bridges for things that hunger to be real. If you ever find directions to a place that doesn't appear on any map, if someone offers you coordinates to capture reflections of truth, don't go. The images you bring back will be more than just photographs. They'll be doorways. And once you've opened that door, it can never be fully closed again. We learned that lesson in the painted Badlands of North Dakota, where the wind still carries whispers of ancient hungers, and every mirror shows a slightly different world than the one you're standing in. The reflection thieves are patient. They can wait in their world of glass and shadow until someone else comes looking for the perfect shot, the impossible image, the reflection that shows more than it should. And when they do, the pale figures will be ready to steal more than just reflections. They'll steal souls. Just ask our mirrors. They'll tell you the truth, if you dare to look closely enough to see what's really looking back at you from the other side of the glass. But be careful. Once you've seen them, they can see you too. And they're always hungry for new reflections to call home. They warned us. Locals always do. But we laughed. My name's Rebecca Hill. I had just turned 34 when we arrived at the Badlands, and it was the worst mistake of our lives. The October wind carved through the layered rock formations like a dying breath, carrying with it the scent of ancient dust and something else. Something that made my German Shepherd, Kaiser, whine and press against my legs. My husband, Marcus, stood beside our 30-foot Winnebago, hands on his hips, surveying the desolate expanse of South Dakota's Badlands with the satisfied expression of someone who'd found exactly what he was looking for. "This is perfect, Becca," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the vast emptiness. "Complete isolation. No cell towers, no tourists, no distractions. Just us, the stars, and 3 days of pure disconnection." I wanted to share his enthusiasm, I really did. Marcus had been working himself to death at the architectural firm. pulling 18-hour days, missing dinners, forgetting conversations we'd had the night before. This trip was supposed to fix us, to reconnect what 5 years of marriage and 2 years of infertility had slowly eroded. But standing there in that alien landscape of eroded buttes and wind-carved pinnacles, I felt only a growing unease. The ranger at the visitor center had been strange about our destination. When Marcus mentioned we were planning to camp at a remote site off Buffalo Gap Road, the old man's face had changed. He'd leaned forward, his weathered hands gripping the counter, and spoken in a low, urgent voice. "You don't want to go out there, especially not this time of year." The Lakota avoided that area for good reason. They called it Maka Waste, bad land, but not just because of the terrain. That stretch between Cedar Pass and the old homestead ruins. Things get lost out there. People too. Marcus had laughed it off, of course. "Thanks for the local color, but we'll be fine. We've got GPS, satellite phone, everything we need." But the ranger had shaken his head, pressing a worn business card into my hand. "If you insist on going, take this. Emergency contact. And whatever you do, don't follow the voices if you hear them calling. They're not who you think they are." Now, standing in the shadow of a massive butte that looked like a decaying cathedral, I fingered that card in my pocket and watched Kaiser pace anxiously around our campsite. The dog had been agitated since we'd left the main road 2 hours ago, following increasingly faint tire tracks through a maze of gullies and rock formations until we'd found this sheltered spot between 2 towering walls of striated stone. "Look at this place," Marcus continued, pulling out his camera and snapping shots of the alien landscape. "It's like being on Mars. God, I haven't felt this inspired in months." The similarities to Mars weren't lost on me, especially as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the badlands in shades of rust and blood. The formations around us twisted into impossible shapes, some resembling ancient ruins, others like the fossilized remains of enormous creatures. In the growing shadows, I could almost convince myself I saw faces in the rock, watching us with hollow stone eyes. We set up camp as efficiently as we always did. Marcus leveled the RV while I connected the water and electrical systems. Though out here, 40 miles from the nearest power line, we'd be running on batteries and the generator. Kaiser remained restless, his ears constantly swiveling toward sounds I couldn't hear, his hackles raised. "What's wrong with him?" Marcus asked, noticing the dog's behavior as we sat down to dinner. Canned chili heated on the camp stove, beer from our cooler, the simple pleasures of life off the grid. "Probably just all the new smells," I said, though I didn't believe it. Kaiser was a veteran camper, comfortable in any wilderness. But this place felt different, charged with an energy that made my skin prickle and my teeth ache. As darkness fell, the Badlands transformed into something even more alien. The wind picked up, howling through the formations with a sound like voices. Not quite human, but close enough to make us both pause mid-conversation more than once. Stars appeared in abundance, unmarred by light pollution, but their cold brilliance only made our isolation more profound. We tried to maintain our usual camping routine. Marcus set up his telescope while I read by battery-powered lantern light, but concentration proved impossible. The wind carried sounds that shouldn't exist, distant music, fragments of conversation, once what sounded like a child crying. Each time I'd look up, asking, "Did you hear that?" Marcus would shake his head, absorbed in adjusting his equipment. Around midnight, Kaiser started barking. Not his usual warning bark, but something desperate and afraid. He stood at the edge of our circle of light, hackles bristling, growling at the darkness beyond the formations. Marcus emerged from the RV where he'd been reviewing the day's photographs. "What's got into him?" "I don't know. He's been acting strange all day." We stood listening, but heard only wind. Then, faintly, carried on the night air, came the sound of voices. Human voices, talking and laughing as if at a party, but distant and distorted by the rock formations. "Other campers?" Marcus suggested, though we both knew we hadn't seen another vehicle for 50 miles. The voices grew clearer, and my blood chilled as I realized they sounded familiar. Not recognizable exactly, but familiar in the way that made you turn around thinking someone had called your name. Kaiser's barking became more frantic. "We should check it out," Marcus said, reaching for his flashlight. "No." The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "No, we shouldn't." He looked at me strangely. "Becca, if there are people out there in trouble, they don't sound like they're in trouble." And they didn't. The voices carried notes of celebration, of joy even, but something about them made my skin crawl. They seemed to come from different directions simultaneously, as if the speakers were moving through the maze of rock formations, always just out of sight. Marcus was already walking toward the edge of our camp, flashlight beam dancing across the eroded walls. "Hello?" he called out. "Is anyone out there?" The voices stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, Kaiser's whimpering seemed unnaturally loud. Marcus stood frozen at the boundary of our camp, flashlight beam wavering. "Marcus, come back," I whispered. He took another step into the darkness. "Marcus," I hissed louder. He turned back toward me, and in the reflected glow of his flashlight his face looked strange, slack-jawed and dreamy, as if he were sleepwalking. "Did you hear them, Becca? They were calling to us. They want us to join them." No one was calling us. "Come back to the RV." He blinked, shaking his head as if clearing it, then walked back to our camp with quick, nervous steps. "You're right. Must have been the wind playing tricks. But I'd heard them too. And wind didn't explain the words we'd both understood. Come find us. Come play with us. Come home." We retreated to the RV, locking the door, though it seemed a futile gesture in such vast emptiness. Marcus busied himself downloading the day's photos to his laptop while I tried to read, but the words swam before my eyes. Outside, Kaiser had finally stopped barking, but I could hear him pacing around the RV, his claws clicking on stone. Around 3 a.m., I woke to silence. Not the normal silence of a wilderness night filled with small sounds of insects and wind. This was absolute, oppressive silence, as if someone had wrapped the world in cotton. Even Marcus's breathing seemed muted. I slipped out of bed and peered through the RV's small window. Kaiser was nowhere to be seen. My heart hammered as I grabbed a flashlight and slipped outside. The night air was still and cold, carrying that strange dusty smell I'd noticed earlier, but stronger now, almost metallic. "Kaiser," I whispered, not wanting to wake Marcus but desperate to find our dog. My flashlight beam swept across empty stone and sparse vegetation. No sign of the German Shepherd anywhere within the camp's perimeter. Then I heard it. A single bark, distant and echoing, coming from somewhere deep in the rock formations. I followed the sound, my bare feet crunching on gravel and dried grass. The beam of my flashlight seemed pathetically weak against the towering walls of stone that rose around me like the nave of some primordial cathedral. The formations created a natural maze, passages that branched and twisted, leading deeper into the badlands. Another bark, closer now. I quickened my pace, following what seemed like a natural trail worn into the stone by centuries of wind and water. The walls grew higher on either side, cutting off my view of the stars and creating a tunnel-like effect that made my claustrophobia flare. "Kaiser!" I called, louder now, my voice echoing strangely off the rock. The echo came back wrong. Instead of my own voice calling the dog's name, I heard myself saying, "Come find us." I stopped dead, my flashlight beam trembling. That wasn't what I'd said. That couldn't be what I'd said. Another bark, definitely Kaiser's, but now it seemed to come from behind me, back toward the camp. I turned around, confused, trying to retrace my steps through the winding passage, but the path looked different now, unfamiliar. Had I taken a turn I didn't remember? My flashlight flickered and dimmed, the battery dying at the worst possible moment. I shook it, coaxing a few more minutes of weak illumination, and pressed forward toward what I hoped was the way out. That's when I saw the symbols. Carved into the rock walls at eye level, fresh cuts that hadn't been weathered by time. Not Native American petroglyphs, but something else. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. shapes that seemed to shift and writhe in my failing flashlight beam. And below them, in the dust at the base of the wall, footprints, human footprints, but wrong somehow. Too long, with too many toes, pressed deep into the earth as if made by something impossibly heavy. The prints led deeper into the formation, toward a passage I hadn't noticed before, a natural arch that framed perfect darkness. My flashlight died completely. In the absolute darkness, I heard voices again. Not distant now, but close, whispered conversations that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I pressed my back against the stone, heart hammering, trying to orient myself by touch. "She's lost," said a voice that sounded almost like Marcus. "She followed the dog," replied another that might have been my own. "She followed the echoes," corrected a third, and this one I recognized with stomach-dropping certainty. It was Kaiser's bark, but formed into human words. I ran, stumbling through the darkness, hands outstretched, feeling my way along the walls while the voices laughed and chattered behind me. My feet found the trail by instinct, muscle memory guiding me through turns I couldn't see. Thorns tore at my nightgown, and sharp stones cut my feet, but I didn't stop until I saw the blessed glow of our camp's battery-powered lantern. Marcus was standing outside the RV, looking around anxiously. "Becca, where the hell were you? I woke up and you were gone." I collapsed against him, shaking. "Kaiser ran off. I went looking. The voices—" "What voices? And where's Kaiser?" As if summoned by his name, our German shepherd trotted into the circle of light, tail wagging, looking perfectly normal and content. But he was lost. I heard him barking in the formations. Marcus held me at arm's length, studying my face with concern. "Honey, you're bleeding. Look at your feet." I looked down to see my nightgown torn and dirty, my feet scraped and bleeding from the sharp stones. But Kaiser was fine, not even breathing hard, as if he'd been lying peacefully beside the RV all night. "Maybe you were sleepwalking," Marcus suggested gently. The stress of the trip, being in a new place, I wanted to believe that. God, how I wanted to believe it was just a nightmare, just stress-induced sleepwalking in an alien landscape. But the cuts on my feet were real, and when I looked toward the rock formations, I could swear I saw shadows moving against the starlit stone. We spent the rest of the night in the RV with all the lights on. Marcus held me while I told him about the voices, the symbols, the footprints. He listened without judgment, stroking my hair and making soothing sounds, but I could feel his skepticism in the tension of his body. "We'll leave first thing in the morning," he promised. "This place is getting to both of us." But morning brought new problems. I woke to Marcus cursing and banging around in the RV's cab. Our GPS was dead, showing only static snow on its screen. The satellite phone's display read, "No signal," despite the clear sky. Even the RV's built-in compass spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. "Equipment failure," Marcus muttered, but his voice carried a note of doubt. We tried to retrace our route by memory, following the faint tire tracks that had brought us to this place. But after an hour of driving through increasingly unfamiliar terrain, we had to admit the truth. We were lost. The tracks we'd followed in had vanished, erased by wind or simply non-existent. Every canyon looked the same, every formation a twin of the last. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the RV's roof and making the interior stifling despite the air conditioning. "There," Marcus said finally, pointing toward a gap between two buttes. I remember that formation. We came through there. But the gap led to another canyon, and that canyon to another maze of branching passages. We drove for hours, burning precious fuel, the RV's engine running hot in the thin air and punishing terrain. By afternoon, we had to admit we were completely lost. Marcus pulled the RV into the shadow of a massive formation and shut off the engine. In the sudden silence, we could hear Kaiser panting in the heat. The dog had been agitated all day, whining and pacing, occasionally barking at things neither of us could see. "Okay," Marcus said, consulting a paper map he'd pulled from the glove compartment. We entered the Badlands here, drove roughly northwest for about 2 hours. He traced a route with his finger, but I could see the uncertainty in his movements. The map showed dozens of possible routes through the maze of canyons and formations. "We need to find high ground," I suggested. "Get above the formation so we can see the roads. Orient ourselves." Marcus nodded and grabbed his binoculars. "That butte over there looks climbable. I'll scout ahead, see what I can see from the top." "I'm coming with you. Someone should stay with the RV, and Kaiser's too stressed for a hike in this heat." He was right, but I hated the idea of being separated. The memory of last night's voices still echoed in my mind. "Take the walkie-talkie. Check in every 15 minutes. Marcus kissed my forehead and set off toward the towering butte, his figure quickly dwarfed by the massive stone formation. I watched until he disappeared around a bend, then retreated into the RV's air-conditioned interior with Kaiser. The dog was acting stranger than ever, alternately whining at the windows and hiding under the dinette table. I tried to comfort him, but he flinched away from my touch, eyes rolling white with fear. 15 minutes passed. Then 20, 30. "Marcus, this is Becca. Come in. Over." Static. I tried again, adjusting the frequency, checking the battery indicator. The radio was working fine, but Marcus wasn't responding. An hour passed. Then 2. I was preparing to leave the RV and follow his trail when I heard his voice outside. "Becca, come on out here, you have to see this." Relief flooded through me as I pushed open the RV door. But the relief died when I saw Marcus standing at the edge of our camp, face flushed with excitement, holding something in his hands. "Look what I found," he called, holding up what appeared to be a human skull, yellowed with age but intact. Every instinct screamed danger. Marcus was an architect, not an archaeologist, and he knew better than to disturb potential historical artifacts. More importantly, he looked wrong somehow. Too eager, his smile too wide, his eyes reflecting light like an animal's. "Put that down," I said carefully. "We shouldn't be touching that." "But don't you see? This is incredible. There are dozens of them up there, maybe hundreds. An entire burial ground, hidden in the formations. We could be famous for this discovery." Marcus had never cared about fame. He was a quiet man who preferred working behind the scenes, building beautiful things for other people to enjoy. The eager, grasping quality in his voice was completely alien. And then I noticed Kaiser. The dog was pressed against the back of the RV, hackles raised, growling low in his throat. Not at me, at Marcus. "Where are your binoculars?" I asked, stalling for time while my mind raced. Marcus looked confused for a moment. Then his too bright smile returned. "I must have dropped them, but that doesn't matter now. Come with me, Becca. Come see what I found. There are voices up there, singing the most beautiful songs." "Voices?" "The bones sing, Becca. When the wind passes through them, they sing. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." I backed toward the RV door. This wasn't Marcus. Something was wearing his face, speaking with his voice, but the man I'd married would never talk about bones singing, would never handle human remains with such cavalier enthusiasm. "Come on," he urged, taking a step closer. "Just for a few minutes. The bones want to meet you." Kaiser's growling intensified, and suddenly the dog lunged forward, not attacking but placing himself between me and the thing that looked like Marcus. The creature, because that's what it was, I was certain now, stumbled backward, its expression shifting from eager enthusiasm to something predatory and cold. "The dog knows," it said in Marcus's voice, but the tone was different now, disappointed. "Animals always know first. What have you done with my husband?" It tilted its head, studying me with eyes that were too bright, too alert. "He's safe. He's singing with the others now. Soon you'll join him, and then we'll all sing together, forever and ever, until the stones crumble to dust." I slammed the RV door and threw the deadbolt, then grabbed the satellite phone from the counter. Still no signal, but maybe if I could get to higher ground. The thing wearing Marcus's face was walking around the RV now, tapping on the windows with bone-white fingers, leaving smears on the glass. "You can't hide forever, Rebecca," it said, voice muffled by the aluminum walls. "We know you're in there. We know you're scared, but there's nothing to fear. The bones are beautiful. The singing is beautiful. You'll see. I found the business card the ranger had given me and tried the emergency number on our backup radio. Nothing but static. The thing outside began humming, a tuneless melody that made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. Kaiser pressed against my legs, whimpering. I could feel his body shaking with terror, and that terror was infectious. If something could frighten a 70-pound German shepherd into submission, what chance did I have? The humming stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard Marcus's real voice, faint and distant, calling my name. But it came from the direction of the rock formations, not from outside the RV. "Becca, help me. I can't find my way back." I pressed my face to the window, looking toward the sound. There, barely visible in the distance, was a figure waving frantically from the base of the butte. Marcus, the real Marcus, I was sure of it. His posture, the way he moved, everything about him was familiar and right in a way the thing outside the RV was not. But when I looked toward where the creature had been standing, it was gone. The decision tore at me. Stay in the RV where it was safe but useless, or risk everything to reach my real husband. The sound of his voice calling my name decided it. I couldn't leave him out there alone, not in this place where reality bent and twisted like heated metal. I grabbed a kitchen knife, clipped the walkie-talkie to my belt, and opened the RV door. The late afternoon sun painted the Badlands in shades of gold and red, beautiful and terrible. Marcus's voice echoed off the rock walls, more desperate now. "Becca! Something's wrong with this place. I can't find the way down." I ran toward the sound, Kaiser bounding alongside me, his earlier terror apparently forgotten. The dog seemed to sense the difference between the real Marcus and his imposter, leading me through the maze of stone with unerring instinct. We found Marcus clinging to a ledge about 30 feet up the butte's face, his climbing route blocked by loose scree that had given way beneath him. His face was scratched and bleeding, his clothes torn, but his eyes were clear and human and afraid in all the right ways. "Thank God," he gasped when he saw me. "I thought I was going crazy. I found these caves up there, full of bones, and I heard voices. But when I tried to come down, the rocks gave way. I've been stuck here for hours." "Don't look down," I called. "I'm going to get help." But even as I said it, I knew there was no help to get. We were alone in this place, cut off from the world, and something that could wear faces was hunting us. The walkie-talkie crackled to life on my belt. "Becca, this is Marcus. Where are you? I'm back at the RV and you're not here." I stared up at my husband, still clinging to the rock face, then down at the radio in my hand. The voice coming through the speaker was identical to the one calling down from the ledge. "Don't listen to it," Marcus shouted from above. "It's not me. It tried to trick me too, wearing your face, but I knew. I knew because it couldn't remember the name of your sister's cat." "Becca!" The radio crackled again. "I'm getting worried. Come back to the RV." I switched off the radio and looked up at Marcus. "Mr. Whiskers," I called. Monica's cat was named Mr. Whiskers. Marcus laughed, a sound of pure relief. "And he was the meanest cat in Ohio. Scratched the hell out of my arms the first time I met him." That was my Marcus. The creature might be able to copy his appearance, even his voice, but it couldn't access his memories, our shared experiences. Getting him down from the ledge took over an hour of careful maneuvering, using the RV's emergency rope and my limited rock climbing skills from college. By the time we made it back to camp, the sun was setting and the Badlands were transforming once again into that alien moonscape. The thing wearing Marcus's face was sitting at our picnic table, perfectly still, watching our approach. "There you are," it said pleasantly. I was starting to worry. Marcus pressed close to my side, his hand finding mine. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "It's like looking in a mirror." The creature stood as we approached, and I noticed it moved differently than Marcus. Too fluid, as if its joints bent in ways human joints shouldn't. Kaiser growled and backed away, confirming what we already knew. "You found him," the creature said, tilting its head in that unnatural way. "Good. Now we can all go to the singing bones together." "What are you?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hand. "We are the echo makers," it replied. "We preserve the voices of the lost. We keep them alive in stone and bone, singing forever in the wind. This place has always belonged to us. The bones you found are our collection, our choir, each one a voice we've saved from silence." "The people in those caves," I said, understanding flooding through me. "The missing campers, the lost hikers." "Not lost," it corrected gently. "Found, preserved, made eternal. Your voices will join theirs, and you'll never be alone again, never be afraid, never grow old or sick or sad. You'll sing with us until the mountains wear away to sand." Marcus squeezed my hand. "Run," he whispered. We bolted. Behind us, the creature let out a sound that might have been laughter or might have been wind through empty bones. It didn't pursue us immediately, and that was almost worse. The confidence of a predator that knows its prey has nowhere to go. We ran through the maze of stone formations, our flashlights throwing wild shadows on the walls. Kaiser led the way, seeming to know paths invisible to human eyes. But as we ran, we heard them. Voices calling from the walls themselves. Fragments of conversations, echoes of lives cut short. "Help us," whispered a woman's voice from a crevice in the rock. "We're so cold," came a child's plea from somewhere above. "Join us," urged a man whose words seemed to emerge from the stone beneath our feet. The voices multiplied, a chorus of the lost and preserved, until the very air thrummed with their pleas. Some begged for rescue, others invited us to stay, and a few warned us to run, run, run before it was too late. We stumbled into a natural amphitheater, a circular space surrounded by towering walls of striated stone. In the center, gleaming in our flashlight beams, lay hundreds of bones arranged in careful patterns. Skulls formed concentric circles, long bones radiating outward like the spokes of some vast wheel. And as the wind passed through the formations above, the bones sang. It was beautiful and horrible, a symphony of the dead performed for an audience of stone and sky. I understood now why the thing wearing Marcus's face had been so eager to bring us here. This wasn't just a burial ground, it was an instrument, played by the wind, conducted by things that had never been human. "The echo makers," Marcus breathed. "They collect voices, preserve them in bone. But how long have they been doing this?" As if in answer to his question, I noticed older bones near the center of the arrangement. Darker, more primitive, some clearly not human at all. This place had been a collection point for millennia, a trap disguised as sanctuary. "We need to get out of here," I whispered, but even as I spoke I heard footsteps echoing from the passages around us. Not just one set, dozens, moving with inhuman coordination through the stone maze. They emerged from the darkness like a nightmare made real. Creatures wearing familiar faces, mimicking human forms but wrong in subtle ways that made the eye rebel. I saw a woman in hiking clothes whose head turned completely around to look at us. A man whose smile split his face from ear to ear. A child who walked on hands that bent backward at impossible angles. And leading them, the thing that wore Marcus's face. But now I could see the differences that familiarity had hidden. Its eyes reflected light like a cat's. Its fingers were too long, ending in points that could have been claws or could have been bone. When it smiled, I counted too many teeth. "Welcome to our concert hall," it said, gesturing to the bone arrangements. "Each note a life, each song a soul. We've been collecting them for so long we've forgotten when we started. But we never forget the music." The other creatures began to hum, a harmony that rose and fell with the wind through the formations. The bones responded, resonating with frequencies that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in our skulls. Kaiser whimpered and pressed against my legs, his usual courage finally broken. "The Native Americans knew about us," the Marcus thing continued conversationally. "They warned their children about the echo makers, the bone singers, the ones who steal voices from the wind. But warnings fade to legend, and legend fades to tourist attractions. Now people come here willingly, seeking isolation and finding so much more. What do you want?" Marcus asked, though we both already knew. Your voices, of course. They're quite lovely, especially when they harmonize. We heard you singing in the RV last night. That little song you always hum when you're nervous, Rebecca. It would sound beautiful, joined with our choir. I hadn't realized I'd been humming. It was an unconscious habit, something I did when anxious, a fragment of melody without words or origin. But somehow they'd heard it, cataloged it, found it worthy of preservation. And you, Marcus, it continued, turning to my husband, you have a beautiful speaking voice, very resonant. It will carry well in the stone chambers. We're particularly excited to preserve your laugh. We don't get many genuine laughs here. Most of our guests are too frightened by the time we meet them. The humming grew louder, other voices joining the harmony from hidden spaces in the rock. I realized we were surrounded not just by these creatures but by the preserved voices of their victims, echoing from the stone itself, trapped in an eternal performance. How? I asked, morbid curiosity overcoming fear. How do you preserve voices? The creature tilted its head, pleased by the question. We take them while they're still warm, it explained with the enthusiasm of an artist describing technique. Fear makes them stronger, love makes them sweeter. But the best voices come from those who die singing. They resonate longer, hold their tone better through the centuries. It gestured to the bone arrangements, and I saw now that they weren't random. The patterns had purpose, acoustic design, each placement calculated to amplify and sustain sound. This entire amphitheater was a musical instrument built from human remains. You can choose, the Marcus thing offered generously. A quick death and a voice that fades within decades, or a slow transformation that preserves every note for eternity. Most choose the quick death, but we always hope. A shot rang out, echoing off the stone walls like thunder. The creature wearing Marcus's face staggered backward, dark fluid spreading across its chest. Behind it, the real Marcus stood with a smoking rifle in his hands. My grandfather's old Winchester that we kept in the RV for emergencies. "Run!" he shouted, working the bolt action and firing again. Chaos erupted in the amphitheater. The other creatures scattered like cockroaches when the lights come on, their human facades melting away to reveal forms that hurt to look at directly. Some skittered up the stone walls on too many limbs. Others simply faded into the shadows, leaving only the echo of their inhuman voices. But the thing that had worn Marcus's face wasn't finished. The bullets had torn through it without seeming to cause real damage, dark ichor sealing the wounds almost immediately. It looked down at its chest with mild interest, then back at us with that too wide smile. Interesting, it mused. We hadn't considered weapons. Most people are too civilized to bring instruments of death to such a sacred place. Marcus fired again, this time aiming for the creature's head. The shot took off the top of its skull, revealing not brain and bone, but crystalline formations that sang with their own ethereal music. The creature paused, reaching up to touch the wound, then began to laugh. "Better," it said, its voice now accompanied by chimes and whispers from the exposed crystal. "Much better. We can work with this." That's when I understood. We couldn't kill them because they weren't alive in any sense we could comprehend. They were something else, something older, crystalline beings that had learned to mimic life so well they'd forgotten their own nature. "The bones," I whispered to Marcus as we backed toward the amphitheater's edge. "If they preserve voices in bone, maybe." Understanding flashed in his eyes. He swung the rifle toward the carefully arranged remains and fired, the bullet shattering a skull at the center of the pattern. The effect was immediate and devastating. A discordant shriek erupted from the broken bone. A voice, trapped for who knows how long, suddenly released. Other voices joined it, screams of rage, cries of relief, howls of madness from minds that had been preserved beyond their breaking point. The amphitheater filled with the cacophony of the dead, finally given voice. The creatures clapped their hands over their ears, their borrowed faces contorting in pain. Some began to flicker like bad television reception, their mimicked forms struggling to maintain cohesion in the face of the sonic assault. Marcus fired again and again, each shot shattering another piece of the bone choir, releasing more trapped voices into the night. I joined him, kicking and stomping on the smaller bones, adding my own voice to the chaos. Not the unconscious humming the creatures wanted to preserve, but a full-throated scream of defiance and rage. Kaiser, inspired by our example, began barking and digging at the bone arrangements, his claws scattering femurs and ribs like oversized pickup sticks. The Marcus creature made one last attempt to stop us, lunging forward with claws extended. But as it moved, its form wavered, the stolen face beginning to melt away like wax in a flame. Underneath, I caught glimpses of something crystalline and geometric, beautiful and terrible and utterly inhuman. Marcus's final shot took it center mass, the bullet passing through crystal formations that sang a death song as they shattered. The creature collapsed into component parts, not flesh and bone, but faceted crystal and resonating stone that had learned to walk upright and wear stolen faces. The other creatures were fleeing now, their forms dissolving as the acoustic foundation of their domain crumbled around them. Without the carefully tuned bone arrangements to anchor their voices, they seemed unable to maintain coherence. We ran, through passages that seemed to shift and change as we passed, following Kaiser's unerring instinct toward safety. Behind us, the amphitheater continued to scream as centuries of trapped voices found release. Some were human, men, women, children who had vanished into these badlands over the decades. But others were older, stranger, the voices of creatures that had never been human at all. We reached the RV as the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon. The vehicle sat exactly where we'd left it. But something was wrong. The windows were covered in handprints, dozens of them pressed against the glass from the inside. "How is that possible?" Marcus whispered, the rifle still clutched in his hands. I approached the driver's side door cautiously, Kaiser whimpering behind me. Through the glass, I could see the RV's interior was destroyed. Cushions shredded, cabinets torn open, our belongings scattered across the floor as if something had been searching desperately for a way out. The door was unlocked. Inside, the damage was even worse than it had appeared from outside. Every surface bore scratches and gouges, some so deep they'd gone through the aluminum walls to the insulation beneath. But most disturbing were the words carved into the dinette table, etched in what looked like fingernails worn down to bloody stumps. "Help us. We're still here. Don't leave us. The bones, remember. The voices we freed." I realized, my stomach churning. "They came here." Marcus nodded grimly, checking the ignition. "The keys are still here. Engine should start." But as he turned the key, only silence answered. Not even the click of a dead battery, just the profound quiet of machinery that had been somehow fundamentally broken. "The CB radio," I suggested, but even before we checked, I knew it would be dead too. Everything electronic in the RV had been systematically destroyed, circuits fried by some force that left the metal components twisted into impossible shapes. Kaiser suddenly began barking again, not at the destroyed interior, but at something outside. Through the windshield, I saw them, figures emerging from the rock formations in the growing dawn light. Not the crystalline creatures we'd fought, but something worse. People. Real people, or what had once been people. They walked with the jerky, unnatural gait of marionettes, their faces slack and eyes empty. Some wore modern clothing, hiking gear, camping outfits, while others were dressed in styles from decades past. A few were so old their clothes had rotted away to tatters, leaving only desiccated skin stretched over prominent bones. But they all shared one terrible feature. Their mouths hung open in perfect O's, as if frozen in the moment of screaming or singing. "The preserved voices," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper. "When we broke the bone arrangements, we didn't just free them. We freed the bodies they came from." The figures surrounded the RV, pressing against the windows with hands that left no prints, staring at us with eyes that held no life but somehow still saw. I recognized some of the faces from missing person posters I'd seen at gas stations and visitor centers, hikers and campers who'd vanished in the Badlands over the years. One of them, a woman in a I Hearts SD t-shirt who couldn't have been dead more than a few months, pressed her face against the passenger window. Her mouth moved, trying to form words, but only a dry, rasping sound emerged. "They want something," I said, though I wasn't sure how I knew. The woman outside tapped on the glass with one skeletal finger, then pointed toward the rock formations where we'd destroyed the bone choir. Her meaning was clear. She wanted us to go back. "No," Marcus said firmly. "We're not going back there." But even as he spoke, more figures emerged from the Badlands. Dozens of them, then hundreds, a parade of the preserved dead stretching back through decades of disappearances. They filled the spaces between the rock formations, a silent army of the Echo Maker's victims. And then one of them spoke. "Please." The voice came from a young man whose Park Service uniform marked him as a ranger from years past. The word emerged as a croak, barely human, but unmistakably a plea. "Please, finish it." "Finish what?" I called through the glass. He pointed with one skeletal arm toward the formations, then made a gesture I eventually interpreted as digging. Behind him, other figures nodded in unison, their empty eye sockets somehow conveying desperate hope. There are more, I realized. More bone choirs, more preserved voices. We only destroyed one. Marcus checked the rifle's ammunition. 3 bullets left. It wasn't enough, not even close. But looking at the faces pressed against our windows, people who had suffered the same fate we'd barely escaped, I knew we had to try. "The emergency kit," I said, remembering the camping supplies we kept stored under the bed. "Road flares, emergency explosives for avalanches." Marcus's eyes lit up. "Of course, if we can't shoot them all, maybe we can bring the whole formation down." The dead parted before us as we emerged from the RV, creating a path back toward the rock formations. They followed at a respectful distance, their mouths moving in silent encouragement. Kaiser trotted between them without fear. Apparently the dog could distinguish between the crystalline creatures and these poor preserved souls. The amphitheater we'd escaped from was empty now, the scattered bones glowing faintly in the dawn light. But, as the dead woman had indicated, there were other passages, other chambers carved deep into the rock. Following the pointing fingers of our ghostly guides, we descended into the Badlands' hidden depths. The first chamber we found was smaller than the amphitheater, but no less horrifying. Bones were embedded directly into the walls here, arranged in spiraling patterns that drew the eye inward until looking at them became physically painful. The sound here was different, too. Not singing, but whispering. Thousands of voices murmuring secrets and confessions and final words. Marcus placed the first charge at the chamber's center, while I distributed the others around the supporting pillars. The dead watched from the entrance, their empty faces somehow conveying approval. We found 5 more chambers, each one a variation on the same terrible theme. In one, children's bones had been arranged into the shape of a massive tree, their small skulls forming fruit that giggled when the wind passed through them. In another, adult remains had been configured into the likeness of a great bird, its wingspan stretching across the entire ceiling, singing lullabies in voices that had been silenced decades ago. The deepest chamber was the oldest, its bone arrangements so ancient they'd begun to fossilize. Here, the Echo Makers had preserved voices from before recorded history. The death songs of creatures that had never been human, the final cries of species extinct for millennia. The sound here was almost beyond hearing, a subsonic thrumming that made our teeth ache and our vision blur. "This is it," Marcus said, placing the final charge. "Ground zero." We retreated to a safe distance as he triggered the detonation. The explosion, when it came, was more than just physical force. The simultaneous destruction of so many preserved voices created a sonic shockwave that rippled through the rock formations like an earthquake made of sound. The Badlands screamed. Every voice that had been trapped in stone and bone for centuries, perhaps millennia, was released at once. The sound was beyond description. Imagine every human scream of fear, rage, and despair that had ever been uttered, compressed into a single moment and amplified by crystalline resonators that had been designed to preserve sound for eternity. The rock formations began to collapse, not from physical damage but from the fundamental disruption of whatever forces had held them in their impossible shapes. spires that had stood for millions of years crumbled like sand castles, their crystalline cores exposed and shattered by the cacophony of freed voices. We ran with the dead beside us, all of us fleeing the dissolution of a place that had existed outside natural law. Behind us, the Echo Maker's domain collapsed into rubble and dust, taking with it the instruments they'd used to preserve stolen voices. The dead began to fade as we reached the RV. One by one, they simply stopped existing. Their purpose fulfilled, their voices finally free to find whatever peace awaited beyond death. The ranger who had spoken to us was among the last to go, offering a skeletal salute before dissolving into morning mist. But our escape wasn't over. The RV's engine, mysteriously, started on the first try, as if the destruction of the Echo Maker's domain had somehow restored the natural order to this place. We drove through the settling dust and debris, following tire tracks that had reappeared as if by magic, leading us back toward the main road. We didn't speak during the drive. What words could encompass what we'd witnessed, what we'd done? We'd destroyed something ancient and evil, but in doing so, we'd also erased centuries of carefully preserved human voices. Were we heroes or vandals? Liberators or destroyers? It wasn't until we reached the visitor center that the full implications hit me. The ranger who had warned us was still on duty, but when he saw us approaching his desk, his face went white. He dropped the papers he'd been holding and stumbled backward, his mouth working soundlessly. "You," he finally managed. "You went to the Bone Singer's domain. How did you know about them?" Marcus asked. The old man's hands shook as he poured himself coffee from a thermos. "My grandfather told me the stories. His grandfather told him. We've been watching that place for generations, keeping people away when we could, mourning them when we couldn't. It's over," I said. "We destroyed their bone choirs, brought down the formations. The voices are free." He stared at us for a long moment, then walked to the window overlooking the Badlands. In the distance, a massive dust cloud was still settling where the ancient rock formations had stood for millions of years. "Free," he repeated softly. "After all this time, they're finally free." Then he turned back to us, and his expression was one of profound gratitude mixed with something like fear. "You have no idea what you've done," he said. "The Echo Makers weren't just preserving voices here. This was their prison, their containment. The bone choirs weren't just instruments, they were chains." My blood chilled. "What do you mean?" "The stories say the Echo Makers were banished here long ago, trapped by the very voices they'd stolen. As long as the bone choirs existed, they were bound to this place, unable to spread their collection beyond the Badlands." He gestured toward the settling dust cloud. "But now they're free too. And they'll be hungry after centuries of imprisonment. Hungry for new voices, new songs to add to their collection." Marcus and I exchanged glances, understanding the terrible magnitude of what we'd done. In trying to free the preserved dead, we'd unleashed something far worse upon the world. "Where will they go?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. The ranger consulted a well-worn map on his wall, one marked with red pins that I now realized probably indicated disappearances over the years. "They'll follow the voices," he said. "Cities, concerts, anywhere people gather to make music. They'll be drawn to sound like moths to flame." He looked at us with eyes full of ancient sorrow. "You meant well, but good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes. The Lakota knew this. Sometimes the evil you know is preferable to the evil you don't." We left the visitor center in silence, Kaiser whimpering in the back seat as we drove away from the Badlands. But I kept thinking about the ranger's words, about the terrible choice we'd been forced to make. Had we saved the preserved dead, or had we doomed the living? The answer came 3 weeks later. I was watching the news when the report came on. A freak accident at Carnegie Hall during a sold-out performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. The entire orchestra had simply stopped playing mid-movement, their instruments falling silent as one. When security checked on them, they found 120 musicians sitting motionless at their instruments, their faces blank, their mouths hanging open in perfect O's. They were alive, but utterly unresponsive, as if their minds had simply been emptied. The next day brought reports from Nashville, an entire recording studio found in the same condition. Then Los Angeles, then Chicago. Always the same pattern. Musicians gathered to create, found emptied of whatever made them human. But the worst part was the recordings. Security cameras at each location had captured audio of what happened in those final moments. The music would swell to a crescendo, and then silence. But if you listened carefully to the recordings, enhanced them, isolated the frequencies that human ears couldn't quite process, you could hear something else. New voices, crystalline harmonies that hadn't been there before. The preserved dead, perhaps, or something else entirely. Something that had learned to steal not just voices, but souls. And sometimes, late at night when the wind blows just right through our apartment windows, I swear I can hear them calling. Not the echo makers. They're busy with their new hunting grounds, their expanded collection. No, these voices are different, familiar. They sound like Marcus and me, which is impossible, of course. We survived. We escaped. We're here, living our lives, trying to forget what happened in the Badlands. But sometimes I catch Marcus staring at his reflection with a puzzled expression, as if he's trying to remember something important. And sometimes I notice that when I hum, that unconscious habit that drew the echo maker's attention in the first place, no sound emerges at all. We tell ourselves it's trauma, psychological damage from our ordeal. But deep down, in the place where instinct lives, we both know the truth. We never left the Badlands at all. We're still there, our voices preserved in crystal and bone, our bodies walking through the world like marionettes controlled by things that learned to wear human faces. The echo makers got what they wanted in the end. Our songs, our laughter, our love, all carefully cataloged and filed away in their collection. The people living our lives now are just echoes, shadows cast by voices that sing in frequencies beyond human hearing. We go through the motions of existence, but we're empty inside. Hollow vessels pretending to be human. And the terrible thing is, I'm not even sure when it happened. Was it in that final moment before we reached the RV? During the drive back to civilization? Or did it happen gradually, so slowly that we didn't notice ourselves being replaced piece by piece, memory by memory, until nothing was left but the echo of who we used to be? I don't know. All I know is that sometimes when the wind is right and the house is quiet, I can hear our real voices calling from somewhere very far away. They sound afraid and alone, trapped in a place where stone and bone sing lullabies to the damned, and they're begging someone, anyone, to come and find them before they forget how to be human at all. But who would be foolish enough to go looking for voices in the Badlands? Who would be brave enough or stupid enough to challenge the echo makers in their crystalline domain? I suppose we'll find out. After all, stories have power. And this story, true as it is, will find its way to someone who needs to hear it. Someone who will pack their gear and drive into the wastes of South Dakota, following GPS coordinates that lead to a place that shouldn't exist. Someone who will hear the bone singers calling and think they can silence them forever. Someone just like we used to be. The echo makers are patient. They've been collecting voices for millennia, and they can wait a few more years for the perfect addition to their choir. They're waiting for you. And when you come, because someone always comes, they'll be ready with new songs to sing, new voices to preserve, new echoes to add to their eternal collection. Just remember, when you hear us calling from the crystalline caves, when you see our faces carved in stone and bone, we warned you. We tried to tell you. But warnings fade to legend, and legend fades to tourist attractions. And the echo makers are always, sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from the Black Hills from the wind. I'm Sarah Martinez, and I was 29 when I learned that some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. The October wind cut through the ponderosa pines like a blade, carrying with it the scent of dying leaves and something else. Something that made my stomach clench with primitive fear. Our 32-foot Coachman motorhome sat nestled in a grove of aspens whose golden leaves trembled against the darkening sky their whispers almost drowning out the sound of my younger sister Emma retching behind a boulder 50 yards away. "She's getting worse," my husband David said quietly, watching Emma through the RV's window. His weathered hands gripped his coffee mug so tightly I was surprised it didn't shatter. "That's the third time today." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Emma had been sick for 2 days now, ever since we'd arrived at this remote camping spot deep in the Black Hills of South Dakota. What had started as mild nausea had progressed to violent vomiting, cold sweats, and a hollow look in her eyes that reminded me of famine victims in documentary footage. But it wasn't just regular sickness. Emma was eating constantly, everything she could get her hands on. Yet she kept getting thinner. Yesterday she'd consumed an entire bag of trail mix, 2 sandwiches, a can of soup, and half a sleeve of crackers in less than an hour, only to throw it all up 20 minutes later. And still she begged for more food, her eyes wide and desperate, as if she were starving to death from the inside out. "Maybe we should pack up, head back to Rapid City," David suggested, running a hand through his graying hair. "Get her to a hospital." "You know she won't leave," I replied, watching Emma stumble back toward the RV. At 26, my sister was stubborn as a mule when she set her mind to something, and she'd been planning this girls' trip for months, a chance for us to reconnect after years of growing apart, complicated by her recent divorce and my own struggles with infertility. Emma had chosen this spot specifically, following obscure directions she'd found on some hiking forum. A hidden campground in the northern Black Hills, accessible only by an old logging road that wasn't marked on any official maps. She'd been excited about the isolation, the chance to disconnect from the world and find herself among the ancient pines. Now, watching her lean against a tree and dry heave despite having nothing left in her stomach, I wondered if we'd found something else entirely. "I'm fine," Emma gasped as she approached the RV, though her pale face and trembling hands suggested otherwise. "Just need to eat something. Do we have any more of those energy bars?" David and I exchanged glances. We'd brought enough food for a week-long trip, but Emma had already consumed most of our supplies in 2 days. The local town was 40 miles away through winding mountain roads, and with evening approaching, a supply run would have to wait until morning. "Em, maybe you should take it easy," I said gently. "Your body might need time to—" "I'm hungry," she snapped, her voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. Her brown eyes, normally warm and full of laughter, had taken on an almost predatory intensity. "You don't understand. I'm so hungry it feels like my stomach is eating itself. Please, Sarah, just something, anything." The desperation in her voice made my chest tight. I'd seen Emma through breakups, job losses, our parents' deaths 3 years ago, but I'd never seen her like this. Whatever was happening to her went beyond ordinary illness. "Okay," I said finally. "There's some beef jerky in the cabinet. But Em, if you don't keep it down this time—" She was already moving, pushing past me into the RV with surprising strength for someone who looked like she'd lost 15 pounds in 2 days. I heard cabinets slamming open, the rustle of packaging, and then the wet sounds of desperate eating. David touched my arm. "Sarah, this isn't normal. The way she's acting, the things she's eating. Yesterday, I caught her chewing on a pine cone. When I asked her about it, she just stared at me like she didn't understand the question. I shivered, remembering. I'd also noticed Emma picking berries from bushes around our campsite, stuffing them in her mouth without checking if they were safe to eat. When I'd tried to stop her, she'd snarled at me. Actually snarled, like a wild animal protecting its kill. "Let's give it one more night," I said, though my instincts screamed otherwise. "If she's not better by morning, we'll drag her to a hospital whether she likes it or not." That evening, we built a fire in the stone ring someone had constructed at the center of our campsite. The flames danced between the pines, casting shifting shadows that seemed to move independently of the trees. Emma sat as close to the fire as possible, gnawing on a stick of jerky with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Tell me about this place again," David said, his architect's mind always curious about the spaces we inhabited. "How did you find directions to somewhere that's not on any map?" Emma looked up from her jerky, her eyes reflecting the firelight like an animal's. "Forum Post," she mumbled around a mouthful of dried meat. user called themselves Watchinin, said it was Lakota for to think deeply. They posted coordinates and talked about this hidden spot where the old hunger sleeps. The old hunger? I asked, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Native American thing, supposedly. Some kind of spiritual concept about... Emma paused, chewing thoughtfully. About appetite that goes beyond food, hunger for experiences, for life itself. The post said this place had special significance, that spending time here could help you understand your own deepest needs. David poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. Sounds like New Age nonsense to me. Maybe, Emma said, but her tone suggested she was beginning to have doubts. The weird thing is, I can't find that forum post anymore. I've looked for it on my phone a dozen times since we got here, but it's like it never existed. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. What do you mean, it never existed? I mean, when I search for Watsonin, or Old Hunger, or even the exact title of the post, nothing comes up. Not in my browser history, not in the forum archives, nowhere. It's like someone erased it. Or like it was never real to begin with, I thought but didn't say. The Black Hills were full of stories. Lakota legends, frontier tales, modern urban myths. Maybe Emma had seen something that played into her own psychological needs, her post-divorce hunger for meaning and direction. But that didn't explain what was happening to her body. Around midnight, I woke to strange sounds coming from outside the RV. At first I thought it was Emma being sick again, but as I listened more carefully, I realized she was eating something. Not just eating, devouring, with wet, tearing sounds that made my stomach lurch. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake David, and peered through the window. Emma crouched beside the fire pit, her back to me. In the dying light of the embers, I could see her shoulders moving rhythmically as she consumed something with animalistic intensity. The sounds were horrible. Crunching, slurping, the wet noise of teeth meeting resistance. "Em?" I whispered, tapping on the window. She froze, then slowly turned toward the RV. In the dim light, her face was streaked with something dark. Her mouth hung open, revealing teeth stained black, and her eyes held no recognition, just the blank stare of a predator interrupted during feeding. For a moment, we stared at each other through the glass. Then Emma's expression shifted, confusion replacing the animal blankness. "Sarah?" she said, her voice thick and strange. What time is it?" I grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside, David stirring behind me. Emma was sitting by the fire pit now, looking around in bewilderment. The ground around her was littered with the remains of something, bones and fur and what looked like the scattered pieces of a small animal. "Em, what happened? What were you eating?" She looked down at the debris around her feet, her face crumpling in horror. I don't remember. I was hungry, so hungry, and then she held up her hands, which were covered in blood and fur. "Oh, God, Sarah, what's happening to me?" David appeared beside me, flashlight beam revealing the full extent of the carnage. It looked like Emma had caught and consumed a rabbit or squirrel with her bare hands, tearing it apart and eating it raw. The thought made my stomach heave. "We're leaving," David said firmly. "Right now. We'll pack up and drive to the nearest hospital." "No," Emma said, scrambling to her feet. "Please, not yet. I feel better now. I feel full, for the first time in days. Maybe whatever this is, it's passing." She did look better. The hollow expression was gone, replaced by something approaching normalcy. Her skin had more color, and she moved with her usual grace instead of the jerky, desperate motions of the past 2 days. "Emma, you just ate a wild animal raw," I said carefully. "That's not normal hunger. That's not normal anything." "I know," she whispered, tears starting to flow. "I know it's not normal, but I can't help it. When the hunger comes, it's like I'm not even me anymore. Like something else is controlling my body." David and I cleaned her up as best we could with wet wipes and bottled water, then helped her back into the RV. She fell asleep almost immediately, curled up on the dinette that converted into a bed, looking young and vulnerable in the battery-powered lamplight. We should have left yesterday, David said quietly as we lay in our bed, listening to Emma's steady breathing. I know. But look at her now. She seems peaceful for the first time since we got here. Maybe whatever this is really is passing. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Something was very wrong with this place, something that went beyond Emma's strange illness. I'd been having my own problems since we'd arrived. Vivid dreams filled with running through dark forests, always chasing something just out of sight. Dreams where I woke with the taste of copper in my mouth and dirt under my fingernails. And there were the sounds at night. Footsteps circling our campsite just beyond the reach of our lights. Whispers in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. Once, I could have sworn I heard someone calling my name from deep in the woods, but when I'd looked outside, there was nothing but darkness and wind. The Black Hills felt different from other wilderness areas we'd visited. Older, somehow. Hungrier. As if the land itself was aware and watching, waiting for something. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, David was shaking me awake. Sarah, he whispered urgently. Sarah, wake up. She's gone. I sat up, instantly alert. Emma's bed was empty, the blankets thrown aside. The RV's door hung open, letting in the cold night air. We grabbed flashlights and stepped outside, calling her name. Our voices echoed off the surrounding hills, but there was no answer. The fire had died to cold ashes, and our campsite felt abandoned, as if we were the only living things for miles around. There, David said, pointing his beam toward a gap between two large pines. Footprints. Emma's bare feet had left clear impressions in the soft earth, leading away from our campsite and into the dense forest. We followed the trail by flashlight, calling her name and receiving only echoes in return. The tracks led deeper into the hills than I'd expected, following what might have been an old animal trail through increasingly dense vegetation. Pine branches caught at our clothes and scratched our faces as we pushed forward, but Emma's footprints remained clear in the beam of our lights. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, we found her. She stood in the center of a natural clearing, her back to us, perfectly still. Her nightgown was torn and dirty, and her hair hung loose around her shoulders. As we approached, I could see that she was looking up at something. A massive pine tree that dominated the clearing, its trunk easily 6 feet in diameter and its crown lost in darkness. "Em?" I called softly. "Emma, what are you doing out here?" She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge our presence. Up close, I could see that she was trembling, though whether from cold or something else, I couldn't tell. David reached out to touch her shoulder, and she spun around with inhuman speed. Her face was wrong. The features were Emma's, but the expression was completely alien. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, pupils dilated so far they looked black. Her mouth hung open, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than they should be, stained with something dark. "The tree," she said in a voice that didn't sound like hers at all, deeper, rougher, as if her vocal cords had been damaged. "It's hungry. So hungry. It's been waiting so long." I looked up at the massive pine, trying to understand what she meant. In the weak light of our flashlights, the tree looked ancient beyond measure, its bark scarred and twisted, its lower branches thick as a man's torso. Some of the scars looked almost like faces, agonized expressions carved into the living wood. "Emma, you're scaring me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Let's go back to the RV. You can tell us about the tree in the morning." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Morning? There won't be a morning. Not for us. The tree has been feeding for so long, but it's still hungry. It needs fresh offerings." David stepped forward, his face set with determination. "Enough of this. Emma, whatever's wrong with you, we're going to get you help. But right now, you're coming back with us." He reached for her arm, and Emma's hand shot out faster than a striking snake. Her fingers, which looked somehow longer than they should be, wrapped around David's wrist. I heard a wet, popping sound, and David screamed. When Emma pulled her hand away, David's wrist was bleeding from 5 deep puncture wounds. She brought her bloody fingers to her mouth and sucked them clean, her eyes rolling back in ecstasy. "So good," she moaned. so warm. But just a taste. The tree wants the whole feast. That's when I understood. Whatever had happened to Emma wasn't just illness. It was transformation. Something in this place, something connected to the massive tree, was changing her into something that fed on more than food. Something that fed on life itself. I grabbed David's good arm and pulled him backward, away from my sister and toward the trail we'd followed. "Run," I whispered. "Run now." We crashed through the forest, branches whipping at our faces, David cradling his injured wrist against his chest. Behind us, I could hear Emma following. Not running, but moving through the trees with an eerie silence that was somehow more terrifying than crashing footsteps would have been. We made it back to the campsite just as the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky. I helped David into the RV and started the engine while he wrapped his wrist with gauze from our first aid kit. "What about Emma?" he asked as I threw the vehicle into drive. I looked back toward the forest, where my sister was probably still searching for us among the trees. "She's not Emma anymore," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know what she is, but she's not my sister." We drove in silence down the old logging road, winding through valleys and around hills that all looked the same in the gray morning light. David dozed fitfully beside me, occasionally stirring to give directions or warn me about a particularly treacherous curve. It wasn't until we reached the main highway that I realized we had a problem. "David," I said, shaking his shoulder. "David, wake up." He opened his eyes, blinking in confusion. "What is it?" "Your wrist. Look at your wrist." He pulled back the gauze bandages we'd wrapped around the puncture wounds. The skin underneath was completely smooth and unmarked, as if Emma had never touched him at all. "That's impossible," he whispered. I felt her fingers go right through. There was so much blood. I pulled the RV over at the next rest stop and we examined his wrist more carefully. There was no sign of injury, no scars, no tenderness. Even the blood that had soaked through the bandages was gone, leaving only clean white gauze. "Maybe we imagined it," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The stress, the isolation, Emma's condition, maybe we both hallucinated the whole thing." I wanted to believe that. God, how I wanted to believe it was all just a shared nightmare brought on by exhaustion and fear. But I could still smell the copper scent of blood, could still hear the wet sound of Emma's teeth tearing into raw meat. We reported Emma missing to the authorities in Rapid City, telling them she'd wandered away from our campsite during the night. Search and rescue teams scoured the area for 3 days, but they found no trace of her. It was as if she'd simply vanished into the Black Hills. The official report listed her as missing, presumed dead due to exposure. The case remained open, but after a few weeks, the active search was called off. The rangers suggested that wild animals might have scattered her remains, explaining the lack of physical evidence. David and I returned home to Colorado, but the nightmares followed us. Every night I dreamed of Emma standing in that clearing, her transformed face turned toward the ancient pine. In the dreams, she was always calling my name, begging me to come back and feed the hungry tree. The dreams might have faded with time, might have been dismissed as trauma-induced hallucinations, if not for what I found 3 months later. I was scrolling through a missing persons website, a morbid habit I'd developed since Emma's disappearance, when I saw a familiar face. A young man named Michael Crow Feather, 24 years old, reported missing after a solo camping trip in the Black Hills. The photo showed a handsome Native American man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. But it was the details of his disappearance that made my blood run cold. He'd been found by hikers in a state of extreme malnutrition, despite having packed enough food for a week-long trip. Witnesses described him as acting like a wild animal, consuming anything he could find: plants, insects, even dirt and bark. He'd been hospitalized for observation, but had escaped during his second night, leaving behind only bloody handprints on the walls and a message scrawled in what appeared to be his own blood. "The tree is hungry. Feed the tree." Michael had vanished into the night and hadn't been seen since. That was 6 weeks ago. I began researching more systematically, cross-referencing missing person reports with locations in the Black Hills. What I found made my hands shake as I typed. Over the past 5 years, 17 people had disappeared in the same general area where we'd camped. All were experienced outdoors enthusiasts. All had been found in similar conditions: extreme hunger despite adequate food supplies, animalistic behavior, mentions of feeding something in the forest, and all had mentioned a tree. The local Lakota reservation had its own stories. I found blog posts and forum discussions about something called the hunger tree, a massive pine said to be possessed by an ancient spirit that fed on human life force. According to the legends, the spirit could influence people camping in its territory, gradually transforming them into hunting vessels that would bring it fresh prey. The stories were remarkably consistent. The affected person would begin eating constantly but never feel satisfied. They would start craving raw meat, then living flesh. Eventually, they would be drawn to the tree itself, where they would either disappear entirely or return as something no longer human, something that hunted other campers to feed their master. I tried to dismiss it all as folklore, local superstition twisted around a series of unfortunate disappearances. But then I found a report that made my blood freeze. Emma Martinez had been spotted. A park ranger had filed an incident report describing an encounter with a woman matching Emma's description. She'd been seen near a popular hiking trail, watching a family set up their campsite from the cover of the trees. When the ranger approached, she'd fled into the forest with inhuman speed and agility. The sighting had occurred just 2 weeks ago, less than 10 miles from where we'd been camping. I called the ranger who'd filed the report, a woman named Janet Crow Dog who'd been working in the Black Hills for over 20 years. "I've seen them before," she told me quietly. "The ones that get taken by the hunger tree. They don't die, exactly. They become something else. Scouts, hunters, designed to lure fresh prey back to the tree. Then my sister is still alive? She's still walking around, if that's what you mean. But what's left of her humanity? That's harder to say. The tree changes them, inside and out, makes them into perfect predators." Janet agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in Rapid City the next day. She was a compact woman in her 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes that had seen too much. "Your sister wasn't the first to be taken this year," she told me over coffee that grew cold as we talked. "There was a couple from Minnesota in August, a solo hiker from Nebraska in September. All the same pattern. Hunger that couldn't be satisfied, behavioral changes, then disappearance. How long has this been going on? According to tribal elders, centuries, maybe longer. The tree has always been there, and it's always been hungry. But it seems to be getting more active lately, taking more people." She pulled out a tablet and showed me satellite images of the area where we'd camped. The clearing with the massive pine was clearly visible. But what shocked me was how many other clearings surrounded it. Dozens of smaller spaces, each centered around what looked like another ancient tree. "It's spreading," Janet explained, "creating offspring, expanding its territory. Each new tree needs to be fed, needs to create its own hunting pack." "What happened to the people it took? Are they all still out there?" Janet's expression darkened. "Some of them, the ones who adapted well to the change. But others." She showed me photos from various crime scenes, shredded camping gear, bones picked clean, evidence of struggle. The tree doesn't keep all its servants. Some are just food. I stared at the photos, trying not to imagine Emma meeting such a fate. Is there any way to help them? To reverse what's been done? Not that I know of. The tree's influence goes deep, changes them on a fundamental level. By the time they start hunting for it, there's usually nothing left of the original person. But Janet's next words gave me hope. Usually. There have been exceptions. Rare cases where someone broke free of the tree's control, fought their way back to humanity. It takes incredible will, and usually requires some kind of anchor, a connection to their old life strong enough to pull them back. I thought about Emma as she'd been before our trip, grieving her divorce, searching for meaning, desperate to reconnect with family. Maybe that desperation, that need for human connection, could be turned against the tree's influence. "I want to go back," I said. "I want to try to find her." Janet shook her head. "Bad idea. You barely escaped the first time, and that was when you had 2 people and your sister was still in the early stages of transformation. Now she's had months to adapt, to become what the tree needs her to be. She's my sister. I can't just abandon her. You're not abandoning her. You're accepting that she's gone. But I couldn't accept it. Maybe it was the same stubborn streak that had gotten Emma into trouble in the first place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere inside the thing wearing my sister's face, the real Emma was still fighting to get out. It took me 2 weeks to plan the expedition. David refused to come. His encounter with transformed Emma had left him with nightmares and a deep reluctance to return to the Black Hills. I couldn't blame him, but I also couldn't wait for him to change his mind. I studied everything I could find about the hunger tree and its victims. Most sources agreed on a few key points. The tree's influence was strongest at night, its servants were vulnerable to fire, and the transformation could potentially be reversed if the victim was separated from the tree for an extended period. I also learned about traditional Lakota methods for dealing with malevolent spirits. I contacted a medicine man named Thomas Crow Feather, Michael's grandfather, who agreed to help despite his skepticism about my chances. The tree is very old, he told me as we sat in his kitchen on the reservation. Older than the Lakota, older than the Cheyenne who were here before us. It has survived because it's patient and clever. It doesn't just take bodies, it takes souls. He gave me a bundle of sage and sweetgrass, along with instructions for a purification ritual. If you find your sister, if any part of her is still human, this might help. But understand, what comes back might not be the person you remember. I also armed myself with more practical tools. A high-powered flashlight, road flares, a GPS tracker, and a satellite phone for emergencies. If Emma was still in the area, if she was still capable of recognizing me, I would find her. I returned to the Black Hills on a crisp November morning, following the same winding roads that had brought us there 2 months earlier. The aspens had lost their leaves, leaving the landscape bare and stark under the gray sky. Everything looked different in the autumn light. Smaller, less threatening, just another stretch of wilderness. But as I turned onto the old logging road, the familiar sense of wrongness settled over me like a shroud. The trees seemed to lean inward, blocking out the sky. The silence was too complete, as if every bird and insect had fled the area. I parked at the same spot where we'd made camp, now overgrown with weeds and scattered with the detritus of wind and weather. Our old fire ring was still there, filled with dead leaves and pine needles. It was mid-afternoon, and I had perhaps 4 hours of daylight left. According to my research, the tree's servants were most active at night, which meant I had a narrow window to search during the safer daylight hours. I followed the same trail Emma had taken the night she disappeared, marking my path with strips of bright orange surveyor's tape. The forest felt different in autumn, more open, less oppressive. But as I moved deeper into the hills, I began to notice signs of habitation. Crude shelters built from branches and pine boughs hidden in the undergrowth. Bones scattered around what looked like feeding sites. Scratches on tree trunks that might have been territorial markings. Whatever lived in these woods now, it wasn't entirely wild. I found the clearing just as the sun was beginning to set. The massive pine dominated the space just as I remembered, its ancient bulk radiating a sense of patient malevolence. But now I could see it wasn't alone. Smaller figures moved among its branches, human-shaped but wrong, perched in the tree like enormous birds. One of them dropped to the ground as I entered the clearing, landing with inhuman grace. It had been a woman once, I thought, though it was hard to tell. Her hair was matted with dirt and pine needles, her clothes reduced to tattered rags. But it was her face that made my stomach clench. Still recognizably human, but with eyes that held no warmth, no recognition, only hunger. She tilted her head, studying me with predatory interest, then opened her mouth and made a sound like wind through empty caves. Other figures began dropping from the tree, surrounding me in a loose circle. "Emma," I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the clearing. "Emma, I know you're here. I came back for you." Movement in the shadows at the base of the tree. A figure stepped into view and my heart nearly stopped. It was Emma, but transformed almost beyond recognition. She was painfully thin, her cheekbones sharp as blades, her eyes sunken deep in her skull. Her hair had grown wild and tangled, and her skin had taken on a grayish pallor that reminded me of mushrooms growing in dark places. But it was still her face. Still, my sister, Sarah, she said, her voice a dry whisper. You came back. I came to bring you home, Em. She laughed, the sound like wind chimes made of bone. Home. This is home now. The tree is home. It feeds us, protects us, gives us purpose. The other figures in the clearing began to move closer, forming a tighter circle. I could smell them now, the scent of pine and decay, of meat left too long in the sun. Emma, listen to me. This isn't you. This isn't what you wanted when we came here. You wanted to find yourself, remember? You wanted to heal. Something flickered in her eyes. A moment of confusion, of doubt. The advance of the other figures slowed. I am healed, she said, but with less certainty. I'm not hungry anymore. The tree taught me how to feed, how to satisfy the emptiness inside. You're not healed, Em. You're sick. The tree is making you sick. I pulled out the bundle of sage Thomas had given me, fighting to remember the words of the purification ritual. You don't have to stay here. You can come back with me. Emma's face contorted with rage. You don't understand. The hunger was killing me before, eating me alive from the inside. Here, I can feed it. Here, it makes sense. She gestured to the other figures surrounding us. We all found our way here, all of us who were empty inside. The tree saves us. It gives us what we need. But even as she spoke, I could see the doubt growing in her eyes. The real Emma. The sister who'd raised me after our parents died, who'd held me when I cried about my failed pregnancies, who'd always put family first. She was still in there, fighting to get out. Remember Mr. Whiskers? I said suddenly, latching onto the same memory that had helped me identify the real Marcus in the Badlands. Remember Monica's cat, how he used to hide under your bed when Dad got drunk? Emma stopped mid-sentence, her face going blank. Around us, the other figures shifted restlessly, sensing something was wrong with their pack member. He would purr, she whispered, and for a moment her voice sounded almost normal. So loud you could hear him through the mattress. And you would climb in with me and we'd listen to him purr until Dad passed out. I remember, I said, stepping closer despite the growls from the surrounding figures. I remember how you protected me, how you always put yourself between me and anything that might hurt me. Tears began streaming down Emma's face, cutting tracks through the dirt and grime. Sarah, I'm so hungry. I'm always so hungry, and the only thing that helps is... I know, but you don't have to be hungry anymore. Come with me. We'll figure it out together, like we always have. For a moment, I thought I'd reached her. Emma took a step toward me, her hand extended, her face crumpling with the effort of fighting whatever the tree had done to her mind. Then the massive pine began to creak and groan, its branches swaying despite the still air. The sound was like a giant voice, speaking in frequencies below human hearing but somehow comprehensible nonetheless. Emma's face went blank again, her extended hand dropping to her side. The tree says no, she said in that hollow voice. The tree says you're trying to steal its children. The tree says you have to stay. The circle of figures closed in, and I realized my mistake. I'd focused so much on reaching Emma that I'd forgotten the source of her transformation. The tree itself was aware, was fighting back against my attempts to reclaim its servant. I lit the bundle of sage with my lighter, holding it up like a weapon. The aromatic smoke billowed out, and several of the approaching figures stumbled backward, covering their faces and making sounds of distress. The purification ritual, I said, trying to remember Thomas's instructions. Creator, cleanse this place of evil. Drive out the hunger that devours souls. Protect those who have lost their way. The words felt clumsy in my mouth, inadequate against the ancient malevolence that radiated from the tree. But they seemed to have some effect. The pine's groaning intensified, and its servants became more agitated, circling at a distance but not closing in. Emma stood frozen between two worlds, her face cycling between recognition and blank hunger. I could see her fighting, could see the real Emma struggling against whatever hold the tree had on her mind. "The tree is lying to you," I said, holding the smoking sage between us like a shield. "It doesn't feed you. It feeds on you. It's eating your soul piece by piece, and when there's nothing left, it'll use your body to hunt others." "No," Emma whispered, but the word lacked conviction. "It saves us. It stops the hunger. Look around you, Em. Look at what you've become. Is this really better than being human?" For the first time since entering the clearing, Emma seemed to truly see her surroundings. She looked at the other transformed figures, at their empty eyes and predatory poses. She looked down at her own emaciated body, at the dirt and blood under her fingernails. "Oh, God," she breathed. "What have I done? What have I become?" The moment of clarity seemed to break something inside her. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Her hands clutched to her head as if trying to hold her fragmenting mind together. The tree's groaning became a roar, and its branches began thrashing violently. The other figures in the clearing screamed, not with human voices but with sounds like breaking wood and tearing metal. Some of them began advancing again despite the sage smoke, their faces contorted with rage. I grabbed Emma's arm and pulled her to her feet. "We have to go. Now." She was dead weight at first, her transformation having left her weak and disoriented. But as we stumbled toward the edge of the clearing, some of her old strength seemed to return. She gripped my hand with desperate intensity, her eyes clearing with each step away from the massive pine. Behind us, the tree's servants gave chase, but the sage smoke created a barrier they seemed reluctant to cross. I kept the burning bundle held high, praying it would last long enough to get us to safety. "Sarah," Emma gasped as we reached the tree line. "Sarah, I remember now. The things I did. The things I ate." "Don't think about it," I said, pulling her along the trail I'd marked with orange tape. "Just focus on getting out of here." But escape wasn't going to be that simple. As we moved through the forest, I realized the tree's influence extended far beyond the clearing. The very landscape seemed to be working against us. Trails that I'd marked clearly on the way in had vanished, leaving only impenetrable thickets. The orange tape markers were gone, as if they'd never existed. Worse, we weren't alone in the woods. I could hear them moving parallel to our path. Footsteps that matched our pace, shadows that flickered between the trees. The tree's servants were herding us, driving us away from the road and deeper into their territory. "It's playing with us," Emma said, her voice gaining strength as we put distance between ourselves and the clearing. "The tree, it's intelligent. It's been learning from everyone it's taken over the years." My satellite phone was dead, its screen showing only static. My GPS had likewise failed, the display spinning aimlessly as if magnetic north no longer existed. We were truly lost, cut off from the outside world and surrounded by things that had once been human. As night fell, the situation became more desperate. The temperature dropped rapidly, and without a proper winter gear, hypothermia was a real threat. But more immediately dangerous were the sounds closing in around us, inhuman voices calling to each other through the darkness, coordinating their hunt. "There," Emma said, pointing to a rocky outcropping ahead. "We can make a stand there, use the rocks for protection." We climbed the small hill, finding a natural shelter formed by fallen boulders. I gathered dry pine needles and built a small fire while Emma kept watch, her transformed senses apparently still sharp enough to detect movement in the darkness. "They're all around us," she reported quietly. "At least a dozen, maybe more. But they're keeping their distance from the fire." I added more sage to the flames, sending aromatic smoke billowing into the night air. The sounds in the forest grew more agitated, but our pursuers maintained their distance. "Emma," I said as we huddled together for warmth, "I need to know. Are you still connected to them? To the tree?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "I can feel it," she admitted finally. "Like a whisper in the back of my mind, telling me to come home. But it's getting weaker the farther we get from the clearing. And the hunger? Still there, but different now. Before it was all-consuming, desperate. Now it's just emptiness, like a hollow place inside me that used to be filled with something else. I studied my sister's face in the firelight. She looked more human than she had in the clearing, but there were still changes. Her eyes held flecks of gold that hadn't been there before, and when she smiled, her canine teeth seemed slightly elongated. Thomas said the transformation might not be completely reversible, I told her, that you might always carry some of what the tree did to you. Emma nodded, unsurprised. I can feel it. The tree changed me on a cellular level, rewrote parts of my DNA. Even if we get out of here, I'll never be completely human again. But you'll still be you, still be my sister, will I? She looked at her hands, flexing fingers that were definitely longer than they'd been before. What if the hunger comes back? What if I hurt someone? Then we'll deal with it, together, like we always have. The attack came at 3 a.m. They emerged from the darkness like a pack of wolves, moving with coordinated precision that spoke of shared consciousness. The tree's servants had overcome their fear of fire, or perhaps their master had finally grown tired of the hunt. The first one to reach our rocky shelter had once been Michael Crow Feather, though only his bone structure remained recognizable. His transformation was far more advanced than Emma's. His limbs elongated, his spine curved, his face stretched into something almost canine. He moved on all fours, claws scraping against stone as he scrambled up the rocks toward us. I met him with a flaming branch, driving him back with burns that sizzled and smoked. But others were coming from different directions, surrounding our position with inhuman patience. "The sage," Emma said urgently. "Throw it on the fire, all of it." I emptied the remaining bundle into the flames, and the resulting smoke cloud was dense enough to create a temporary barrier. But I could see it wouldn't last long. We had maybe minutes before our protection burned away. "There's something else," Emma said, her voice tight with concentration. "Something Thomas didn't tell you about the purification ritual." "What?" "It requires a sacrifice. Something of value to break the spiritual connection." She looked at me with eyes that held terrible understanding. "The tree won't let me go unless it gets something in return." Before I could stop her, Emma stood and walked to the edge of our rocky shelter. The transformed figures below looked up at her with recognition, their predatory postures relaxing slightly. "I offer myself," she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the night air. "I return willingly to serve the tree, in exchange for my sister's safe passage." The forest fell silent. Even the wind through the pines seemed to pause, as if the entire landscape was holding its breath. Then the massive tree's voice echoed from miles away, a sound like breaking mountains that somehow formed words in my mind. "Acceptable." "No!" I lunged forward, but Emma was already moving, leaping down from the rocks with inhuman grace. The other servants parted before her, forming a corridor that led back toward the clearing. "Go, Sarah," she called without looking back. "Follow the fire. It will lead you to the road." I watched in horror as my sister walked into the darkness, surrounded by things that had once been human. The transformed figures followed her, their attention completely focused on escorting her back to their master. The fire beside me suddenly flared higher, its flames turning an unnatural blue-white. In the dancing light, I could see a clear path through the forest. Not the confusing maze of identical trees we'd been lost in, but a straight line that led downhill toward civilization. I wanted to follow Emma, to make one last attempt to save her, but I could feel the tree's attention turning away from me, its interest focused entirely on reclaiming its escaped servant. This was my chance, perhaps my only chance, to escape. I followed the supernatural fire through the forest, stumbling over roots and rocks in my haste to put distance between myself and the clearing. Behind me, I could hear singing. Not human voices, but something else. A harmony that made my bones ache and my vision blur. The tree was welcoming Emma home. I reached my parked RV just as dawn broke over the black hills. The supernatural fire had led me directly to the road, its blue flames disappearing as the first natural sunlight touched the trees. I climbed into the driver's seat with shaking hands and drove away without looking back. The authorities were skeptical of my story, of course. I told them Emma had fallen into a ravine during a night hike, that I'd searched for hours before admitting I needed professional help. Search and rescue teams combed the area for a week, but found no trace of her. I never mentioned the tree or its servants. Who would believe such a story? But I kept researching, kept monitoring missing person reports from the Black Hills. The disappearances continued. 2 more in December, 3 in January, a family of 4 in February. Always the same pattern. Experienced outdoors enthusiasts, reports of extreme hunger, then vanishing without a trace. The tree was growing stronger, expanding its territory, creating new servants from every victim it claimed. And somewhere in those dark woods, Emma was helping it hunt. 6 months after my return, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a photograph taken by a trail camera. Emma's face, but changed, evolved. Her eyes were completely gold now, her features sharp and predatory. She was looking directly into the camera with an expression I'd never seen before. Patient, calculating hunger. On the back of the photo, written in her handwriting but with letters that seemed somehow wrong, was a single message. "The tree remembers your scent, Sarah. It's still hungry." I moved to Florida the next week, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the Black Hills. But geography doesn't matter when something ancient and patient has marked you as prey. The dreams started immediately. Every night, I found myself back in that clearing, standing before the massive pine while Emma called my name from somewhere in its twisted branches. In the dreams, I always walked toward the tree, always felt the irresistible pull of its promised answers to every emptiness in my soul. And I always woke up walking. 3 times now, I've awakened in my backyard, barefoot and heading north. Once I made it 6 blocks before the cold pavement shocked me back to consciousness. Last week, I woke up at a gas station 40 miles away, with no memory of how I'd gotten there and a credit card receipt showing I'd purchased provisions for a camping trip. The tree's influence is spreading, following the network of its servants as they hunt in new territories. Emma was right. I'll never be completely free of what I experienced in those woods. The hunger that consumed her is growing in me, too. A hollow aching that food can't fill and sleep can't ease. Sometimes I catch myself researching flights to South Dakota, planning routes back to the Black Hills. The rational part of my mind screams warnings, but another part, a part that grows stronger every day, whispers about the peace I could find in the shadow of the ancient pine. David has noticed the changes, of course. The way I've started eating raw meat, the way I sometimes speak in a voice that doesn't sound quite like mine. He's begged me to see a doctor, a psychiatrist, anyone who might help explain what's happening to me. But I know no doctor can cure what the tree has awakened in my blood. The transformation that began in Emma is completing itself in me, slowly but inevitably. I can feel my bones changing, my teeth sharpening, my senses expanding beyond human limits. The tree is patient. It can wait for me to come home on my own, drawn by the hunger that grows stronger with each passing day. Or it can send Emma to collect me, using our sisterly bond to lure me back to the clearing where my transformation can be completed. Either way, I know how this story ends. Tonight, I'm going to drive north, following highways that lead through Colorado and Wyoming and into the Black Hills of South Dakota. I'm going to find that old logging road one more time, going to walk the familiar trail to the clearing where my sister waits. Not because I have to, because I want to. The hunger has finally won, and I understand now what Emma meant about the tree giving purpose to emptiness. All my life I've been searching for something to fill the hollow places inside me. Love, family, children I could never have. But the tree offers something better than fulfillment. It offers unity, belonging, a place in something greater and older and hungrier than individual human desires. When you find this account, and someone will find it because I'm leaving it where it can't be missed, don't come looking for me. Don't think you can save me the way I tried to save Emma. The tree is patient, but it's also growing impatient. It needs new servants, new hunters to expand its territory beyond the Black Hills. And it remembers everyone who's ever tasted its influence, who's ever felt the touch of its ancient hunger. If you've read this far, if my story has awakened something restless in your soul, then you're already marked. The tree knows you now, can taste your emptiness across any distance. Sweet dreams. And remember, when you wake up walking, it's already too late to turn back. The hunger in the hills is spreading, one dreamer at a time, and soon the whole world will know the peace of feeding the ancient appetite that sleeps beneath the roots of the world. Come join us. The tree is so very, very hungry, and we are its faithful servants now and always.